I've been thinking about social movements class, and how relevant the topic is these days. If we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, as an example, they're currently making a lot of changes, or at least attempting to make a lot of important changes in the US. But we can expand beyond that as well, more locally, and a movement that has been expanding outside of Florida, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Some of our students have been very involved working with them, making important changes for the lives of farm workers in the US. And then we think about the gay rights movement and our ability now to have equal rights in terms of marriage. And we think earlier, but not that long ago, the Occupy movement, that in many ways, while we don't hear about the Occupy movement as much anymore, it really is still in the kind of argument that is coming out of the Occupy movement is still really present in the minds of many people. The issue of income inequality as a continuing theme really arising from this movement. So, and that's just the US. And some examples of that, there's many others within our context. Globally, there's even more out there happening everywhere. So one must wonder, why are these movements happening? Is it a simple fact that people are just unhappy, so they mobilize to get what they want? However, we know that throughout the world, throughout history, there's been a lot of very unhappy people that are just sitting down and taking it, right? They're not mobilizing, they're not trying to change things. So unhappiness alone will not explain it. Maybe those unhappy people are not mobilizing because they're afraid. They could get repressed if they're demanding for better conditions of life. So they don't mobilize. And yet we know there's a lot of people who get repressed and they continue to work for the social movements. As a matter of fact, most of the time, repression entices people into greater mobilization. So repression is not a very good explanation for necessarily why people are not mobilizing or they are mobilizing. There's something else behind it. And that's what we're going to be beginning to delve in this course. What could be behind it? Are people maybe of certain personalities more likely to participate in social movements than other people? Are people with certain world outlooks more likely to mobilize? Is it really our minds and our understanding of the world, or is it a more structural issue? What is the role of people's networks? Are people whose families tell them this is a moral thing to do, you need to stand up and go out there, more likely to encourage people to participate? Or is it that their friends are saying, no, don't do that, that's really not a good thing to do, that prevents them from doing it? Right? To what extent are those social forces at play and help us understand this? Then, of course, there is the question, these are the more individual, why are we mobilizing? But there are other larger factors. Are there certain things like the resources that we have? Maybe people can't mobilize because they just don't have the money. Right? So we tend to think people who are very poor are the ones who mobilize. Did you know that most of the time people who are immigrating, particularly thinking from Mexico to the US, are not the poorest of the poor of Mexico? Yeah. It's people with resources who can actually pay the coyotes who cross them over. Right? So it's not, so in that sense, money plays a role. So to what extent and how is part of the issues that we're going to be exploring in this course. Other things to look at is there a difference between a revolution, a social movement, a political action group? Right? All of these are asking and looking for change. Are there different ways? What is the difference? Are they significantly different in their own entity, or are they just different expressions of the same thing? So again, some of those questions we're going to be exploring. Now, as you can see, as I present these questions, this course is not the Mobilize 101 tutorial that we had some years back. Right? This is not about learning how to do a social movement. This is the sociology of social movements. How are scholars thinking academically about all of these social transformations? What allows society to move and shift and change? That does not mean, however, that there might be pointers in there for those of you who are activists to learn from the academic world to bring that knowledge into the activist environment, right? So you get something out of that, but our focus will really be an academic perspective. The course is structured such that we're going to be looking at, let's say, the historical development of the social movement theory, moving from earlier thinking about social movements to more current one. So we begin with the concept of breakdown theory, and the similar idea I was pointing out, this idea that social structures are breaking down, people are unhappy, and hence they mobilize. Then we move to political opportunity structures. To what extent does the political environment allow or disallow mobilization? The issue of repression in some ways at play here. And then we look at resource mobilization. What is the role of various kinds of resources, not only monetary, but in terms of skills, capacity, organizational capacity. And then move to more ideological understanding. That's the way that certain interpretations get presented, shape the degree to which a movement can gain support or not gain support. We will be, and we think that also eventually we get into the issue of network analysis, the importance of the various kinds of networks for individual participation, and get more look at what is the current research about why do some people choose to participate in a social movement or don't. Why do, as another way of thinking about it, a small proportion of new college students choose to be really very active with the CIW and others don't? It's an example of looking at that. Why is it, that's at a more individual level. We will be mostly basing our readings on one key textbook, central textbook on social movements that provides that an analytical framework of the development of social theory. But in addition, we'll be looking at, I think I have 4 or 5 other books that take that, about 4 other books that we'll be reading that give examples about various kinds of social movements. We will be looking through both the books and the main text at social movements in the US, significant focus on the US when it comes to the civil rights movement and the women's movement. But we will have also readings from across the globe. The main text provides examples from Europe and Asia, Africa. I don't think we have Africa cases this time around. But we do have another text that will look at Latin American social movements. That's just an expression of my own personal bias. That's where my field of interest is, that's where my expertise is, and that's what I'm sharing with you. As of expectations for this particular course, of course, keeping up with the readings. The other element will be, you will have 2 exams. One is an in-class exam, and the other one will be a take-home exam and a research paper. And that's the fun part. The research paper is a piece where you choose whatever movement you want to explore that you've been interested in and go and explore that theme. And I'll be giving you guidance step by step in building up towards that final research paper. In this case, what I want students to do is gain the skills to apply the theory that we've been learning to an explanation of the movement that you've chosen to study. Right? So the final essay will be weaving together the theory that you choose to use as your framework with the actual movement that you've selected. In some cases, if people are more interested in looking, let's say doing something more like a field research project, you could look at a current social movement, ideally a local social movement, so you have access to them, and instead of doing a bibliographic research, go and interview people, explore what they're doing, and again, apply social theory to that.
How much, I don't want to say leeway, but us being able to define what a social movement is for the research paper, is that what it
That's part of the research project, yeah. So some students end up, that's something that we'll have to discuss together. to explore. Because some movements are right at the edge between being, let's say, more of a political action group than a social movement, right? So those are discussions that we need, depends on the case, where it fits. And that could, in fact, be the paper, right? Where does it fit, given what we know in the theory of social movements?
What are the kind of tactical is that?
I'm not going to cap the course. I haven't had to. You see a lot of people, but not that many people are going to show up to it. One of the things that we limited is that this course is really geared towards the intermediate level, right? So I would not recommend it for first-year students. Reason is you should be expecting, it's a heavy reading class. So just for the class readings, assigned readings for the course, you would anticipate reading 60 to 70 pages per class meeting, so we're talking about 120, 140 pages a week just for this class, only for the class meetings. In addition, you're doing your research, right? So there's that much more reading. So I'm not so sure that that's, just coming in from high school, that this would be the course for first-year students.
What days are you meeting for this class?
This class meets Mondays and Thursdays, 2 to 3:20. Back there.
When will this be offered again?
I teach it every other year.
Sorry, what was the time again?
The time is 2,
No, 2 to
3:20.
3:20?
It's about an hour and 20 minutes. Yes?
Where will the class be held?
It's in College Hall 214. It's a small classroom. It's a fun one.
Are we going to examine any movements in like the Middle East, such as the Arab Spring? Or like...
We have a few examples of that later on, of more current movements, looking at the Arab Spring. But if that's what you're interested in, that could be your research paper.
Okay, then can I ask a follow-up question?
Although that's a more difficult one to follow up, right? Because it's so recent. I'm not sure how much has been written already analytically, but there'll be enough information out there.
And like, is your course organized like chronologically, like the beginning of the year, when you start training, like more
For the most part, yes. It's historically chronological, mostly from a theoretical perspective, right? The older theories, which do look at older movements, we'll be looking at like the Cuban, the Russian, the Mexican, the Algerian Revolution, and then moving on. It looks like we need to move on. But if you have more questions, I'd be happy to answer afterwards.